In September of 1991, two hikers in the Alps found what they thought was someone who'd frozen recently, maybe a few years ago, maybe a decade. What they'd actually found was a murder victim, one who had been lying in that ice for over 5,000 years, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and somehow frozen perfectly enough that scientists could eventually tell us not just who he was, but what he ate for his last meal, what diseases he had, and exactly how he died. This is the story of Ötzi the Iceman and the strangest cold case in human history. Two German tourists, Helmut and Erika Simon, were hiking near the border of Italy and Austria when they spotted something dark sticking out of the ice. At first, everyone assumed it was a modern accident. Mountaineers die in the Alps regularly, and bodies preserved in ice can look deceptively recent. It took days of confusion before anyone realized what they were actually looking at. When archaeologists finally examined the body properly, they realized this wasn't a lost hiker. This was a person from the Copper Age, a time before writing existed in most of the world, before Egypt had pyramids, before anyone had invented the wheel in most of Europe. The recovery itself was messy. Ice picks and even a jackhammer were used before anyone understood the significance of the find, accidentally damaging part of the body and his belongings in the process. Once in a lab, scientists went to work, and what they found was almost unbelievable in its detail. He was roughly 45 years old, which for that time period made him something like an elder. He stood about 5'3", which was fairly average for a man of that era. He had brown eyes, and genetic testing revealed he likely had relatives still living in the region today. But it's his equipment that really tells the story. He was wearing a robe stitched together from different animal hides, a woven grass cape, a fur cap, and shoes stuffed with grass for insulation, essentially prehistoric thermal socks. He carried a copper axe, which at the time was an extremely high-status item, a flint dagger, and 14 arrows, though only 2 were finished and usable. He was also carrying embers wrapped in maple leaves, a portable fire-starting kit. Whoever this man was, he knew exactly how to survive in a hostile, freezing environment. Here's where it gets stranger. Scientists didn't just study his equipment, they studied his body inside and out. His stomach still contained his last meal, meat from an ibex, along with grains and traces of fruit. That single detail let researchers estimate almost exactly how long before his death he'd eaten, and combined with pollen found in his gut, they could trace roughly where he'd been walking in his final hours. He had whipworm, a parasitic infection. He had hardened arteries, early-stage heart disease. He had Lyme disease, one of the oldest confirmed cases in human history. And he had over 60 tattoos across his body, simple lines made by rubbing charcoal into small cuts, possibly for pain relief in his joints, similar to how acupuncture is used today. This one frozen body somehow preserved a more detailed medical record than most historical figures who lived thousands of years later. For years, the assumption was simple. He got caught in a storm, got exhausted, and froze to death. A tragic but ordinary accident. Then in 2001, a new CT scan revealed something everyone had missed: an arrowhead, lodged in his shoulder, having torn through an artery. He didn't freeze, he bled out. And there was more. A deep, defensive-looking wound on his hand, consistent with someone who had recently been in a knife fight, possibly days before his death. Suddenly, this wasn't a sad accident. It was a homicide. Someone shot him in the back from a distance, and he died within minutes, alone, on a mountain pass. So who killed him and why? That part we may never know for certain. Some researchers believe he was involved in some kind of conflict or raid, based on evidence that he'd traveled between different altitudes shortly before dying, a pattern some associate with territorial disputes. Others think it was personal, a grudge, an ambush by someone he knew. What we do know is this: whoever killed him left his valuable copper axe behind. In a culture where that axe represented serious wealth and status, that's strange. It suggests this wasn't a robbery, it was something else. Something that 5,000 years later still doesn't have a clear answer. Ötzi is kept today in a special refrigerated cell in Italy, still frozen, still being studied more than 3 decades after his discovery. Every few years, new technology reveals something new about his final days. In a strange way, his killer accidentally created the most detailed time capsule in human history. We know more about one random man's last meal, his health problems, and his final moments than we know about entire civilizations that came after him. If you found this as fascinating as I did, subscribe. Every week we dig into the strangest, most surprising stories hidden in human history,